Nobody really thinks that Benjamin Netanyahu is going to do what Joe Biden says, right? We all understand that. I know that there's a close relationship between Israel and the U.S. and that they are a strong ally in the Middle East on so many issues. But it's as I've been saying all along, when someone threatens you with lethal force, you, your family, your people with lethal force, you do what you have to do to stop that threat. Everything else just starts to sound like noise. Everything outside of that is a secondary consideration at best. And I do want there to be a ceasefire, and I understand that desire, but I also know that it will come when the Israelis no longer have concerns about an imminent threat from Hamas rockets and Hamas terrorist acts. That's just the way this is going to play out. So we have to keep focused on that. But the thing for me that's pretty fascinating to watch it play out is how the left in this country manages to show us so many of the philosophical dysfunctions that they bring to domestic political issues. You see in the context of Israel and the Palestinians. So many of the misconceptions, the moral relativism, the obsession with victimology, the view of everything through a racial and ethnic lens, so much of that is apparent. And in that way, I think that this can be instructive for all of us because you see that the left approaches everything, foreign policy, domestic policy, economic issues, national security issues, applying these same intellectually bankrupt, morally rotten approaches. They use relativism, victimology, Marxism, critical race theory, which is really just a cousin, an offshoot on the family tree of Marxism. But they apply those frameworks to it, and that's how they end up with absurd things. That's how they end up saying very, very stupid things, and it seems as though they're not able to figure out the most basic concepts of foreign policy. Who are your friends? Who are your enemies? Do they know the difference? Does it matter? Let's just start with that approach. Whenever you're talking, and by the way, that's just a good framework for pretty much life. But it certainly works on the world stage. Who are your friends? Who are your enemies? Do they know the difference? Does it matter? Does it matter? And it seems that there are a lot of people in this country who have a strange affinity for Hamas, a terrorist death cult that will execute people for any number of crimes, real or imagined, that will kill people who oppose the regime with impunity, that will kill homosexuals, that will kill people for a whole range of not actual crimes, but Hamas is a terrorist organization that will determine that there must be an extreme punishment. They will throw people off of buildings. It's a mafia state with some jihadist flavor thrown in. That's what's really the essence of Hamas, an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood in its origins. This should be quite clear. Any of you who have been to Israel, as I have, know it's a rule of law, well-functioning state where people just want to live their lives in peace and want to pursue their own dreams and have their own freedoms. You know, you have Palestinian members of the Knesset. You have Palestinians who have senior posts in government, and they support the Israeli efforts to stop the rocket fire from coming down all over Israel. They agree with them. I mean, I'll tell you this right now. For all my criticism of the Biden administration, if China invaded tomorrow, I'd be talking about how I want to be shoulder to shoulder with good old Uncle Joe and all the crazy libs repelling that invasion. You know, there are some things that really do bring people together. And when you're living in a small country, it's like the size of New Jersey, and you are getting hit with rockets all over the place, it is very understandable in those circumstances. It's very understandable that you're going to rally behind leadership and want your national government, want your armed forces to do everything they can to keep you safe. And yet the idiots of the American left see a moral equivalency here in some ways, or they can't seem to compute all of this. They don't seem to understand, well, why is it that the Israelis end up killing more Palestinians than Hamas ends up killing Israelis? Well, because they're in this for very different reasons, trying to achieve very different ends. Hamas also started it, which is another very important fact to keep in mind as we go through all this. But for me, more than anything else, this illuminates some of the core dysfunctions of left-wing thinking. This shows you why not only do they get it wrong on Israel-Palestine, they get it wrong on so many things. In so many areas, there's a deficiency in their approach. Here's Chris Hayes of MSNBC, who it seems to be an increasingly radical leftist over the years. He used to just be a kind of, shrill beta male, but now he actually seems to want to pose as the revolutionary of sorts. But anyway, here he is. And by the way, before I play the audio here, I want to be clear. I don't want anyone dying in Israel or in Gaza. I wish there was no violence, and I certainly don't want innocent civilians to be killed. But Hamas forces a situation where that will happen. And in fact, and there's plenty of proof of this, because they do have a cult of martyrdom. So to call it a death cult is by no means an exaggeration. You can even see there are mothers of suicide bombers that have been interviewed, of Hamas and other jihadist anti-Israel entities in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip. There are interviews with the parents, with mothers even of young boys who have been suicide bombers in Israel, and they are considered shaheed. They are martyrs, and they celebrate this. They think that this was a good thing, a good idea to go in and strap. This is from years back when this was a constant threat against the Israelis, but they would send individuals with suicide vests into a crowded cafe in Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem and try to murder and maim as many people just who happen to be trying to get a drink, trying to see friends, see family. That's Hamas's version of their glorious resistance. I mean, true evil, really evil personified. And yet Chris Hayes sits here saying, why don't we get an Iron Dome for Gaza? Play 19.
There's been these images I've seen of the Iron Dome system, right? So this missile defense system, the U.S. partly funded, that has been intercepting Hamas rockets into Israel. And those rockets are being fired, as a Palestinian human rights lawyer said on this show last night, indiscriminately civilians, a war crime by definition. And the Iron Dome has worked quite well. Today, some got through. I think 2 Thai nationals, Israeli, died as a result. But I look at those images and I think, well, good. That's good. I'm glad that those rockets are being intercepted. And also, there's some part of me, it's like, can we get an Iron Dome for Gaza? Can the American taxpayer foot the bill to protect innocent children in Gaza, where there's 2 million people in one of the most densely populated parts of the world, so that they don't have death rain down upon them?
The Iron Dome in Gaza is for Hamas to stop firing rockets. Then they'd have a de facto Iron Dome, because Israelis don't want to bomb Gaza. How does a primetime host at MSNBC not understand this? Because it's yet another deficiency of left-wing thinking, bringing moral relativism into this, as if the situations are the same, as if there's an equivalency here between Israeli airstrikes on positions that are Hamas militants, where, yes, there are and will be civilian casualties that are part of that too, and the Hamas approach, which is just kill anybody you can, as many as you can, go for it, do it as often as possible. If there was more parity among the military capabilities of Hamas and Israel, if we were anything near that, we would just have a bigger war. I think it was Ari Fleischer who put out on Twitter, and I don't know if he coined this or if this is a quote from somebody else, but if Hamas disarmed, the violence would end tomorrow. If Israel disarmed, Hamas would end Israel. That's the truth. These are basic, fundamental understandings of the situation. So why does the left get this stuff so wrong? Because they apply the frameworks of identity politics, racial Marxism, victimology, anti-colonial indoctrination. They apply all of those to this conflict today instead of just looking at it with clear eyes and saying, who's causing the violence and how do we stop the violence?
Hey, Team Buck, thank you so much for watching The First on YouTube. If you like this video, please click that little thumbs up button so then it will log as liked. And also, if you want to see more great content from The First, please click subscribe.